I want you to welcome all Denis Kovalevich, who is the co-founder of TechnoSpark, which was one of the first venture studios in the world, which created over 700 startups in robotics, healthcare, clean energy, and more, with an impressive 50% survival rate. This is amazing. So, Denis, welcome. Very excited for your talk.
Good evening. Good evening to those who are in Europe. Good morning for US friends. And I hope if there's somebody from Asia, so good night. It's a bit too late for you, but still okay. Thank you for inviting me for this talk. I hope it will be useful and a bit curious, maybe. So yeah, thank you for introduction. Yeah, I'm one of the I can say not too much people who started this kind of business, venture studios, quite long ago. My journey started even earlier than 2012, in 2011, when we, with a few of my partners, decided to create. So in that time, we didn't have common name venture studio. We called it Startup Fabric. So some organization that creates startups in a scale way. So a lot of startups, build them, scale them, and sell them. So we were thinking about this form that later in 2015 got this name, Venture Studios or Startup Studio. We were looking on this form as a like manufacturing of startups. From the beginning, our approach was a bit opposite to the traditional venture industry approach, venture fund approach, when you are choosing only a few startups from thousands that founders are trying to create and to grow, and you invest in only a few, and only one or two that from those you are investing become really interesting companies and can be sold, can get exit. So from the beginning, our approach was an opposite. We wanted to create a lot of startups and to maximize the exit rate, but looking on exits not as a not only in a logic of valuation, but the logic of number of exits. So as more exits as we can, or as more profitable companies we can create, as it better. So yeah, at the end we built so-called TechnoSpark and 8 regional branches. It was in Russia from 2012 to 2021, and all this network of studios with the head of TechnoSpark created more than 700 companies. Only in one place in TechnoSpark itself, it was created 120 startups through the 10 years. So approximately, we can say that we created something around 1 startup per month. That was a like speed of our action. It was not so, I mean, it was not exactly so if you would look to the particular story, but an average, you can say so. Last years, I'm mostly focusing on investments in startup studios. I'm doing this business from Tel Aviv, from my second country, and I hope you understand why. I wouldn't go to all this story of last 3 years that happened with Russia. It's a bad story. So investments, professional investments in asset studio as a new asset class. And this year, with a few of my partners, we created Summit Studio Capital. It's a company that investing in studios, professional investing in studios, evergreen company with no end, as studios are. I think most of you know that studios are not like venture funds They do not have clear end. So they don't have 10 or 12-year strategy. They work in so-called evergreen model or no-ended model. And that is one of the great advantage of studio. So the investment vehicle that is appropriate to the venture studio should also have evergreen form. That is why we create it in this way. But today I will focus mostly on an introduction of the startup studio as a special asset class. And I hope you will understand why I'm thinking so, and not only me, but also a lot of people in this industry. So first of all, if we will look on a map now, on a global map, we can say that approximately around 1,000 studios are now in the world. Through the last 5 to 7 years, I think appeared most of them. Yes, of course, we can find some first examples 20 years ago, even 25 years ago. We cannot say now that it was startup studio, I mean, particular Idea Lab or other studios. But maybe, yes, we can say that something equal to what we now are calling startup studio, we can find in the past. But I can say it's not only Idea Lab. We can look to the Cambridge in England, and we can find serial entrepreneurship. I don't know, Amadeus Capital with a famous Hermann Hauser started to work in the middle of 19th in a form that now we would call startup studio. At that time they called it venture fund. Now now Amadeus Capital looks like venture fund, but mostly at 30 years ago they were working as a venture studio. They created a lot of startups by themselves, together with founders, but with a growing participation of the partners from the core structure. So there are different examples in the past that we can say were like a mothers or parents or fathers of this asset class. But of course, most of the studios were created through the last 10, 12 years, and some very brave and famous names like Rocket Internet in Europe or Flagship Pioneering in Boston, I think everybody knows. 1,000 venture studios means that this asset class is growing. And my estimation that in a few next year, we will see twice more. I can compare this with a number of accelerators. If we will compare this, you will see that in generally we have now in the world like 2,000 to 3,000 accelerators, and they grow much earlier than venture studios. But we can say that venture studios can grow in the same way, the same momentum. If you will ask me what is the core idea of startup studio, I think that the core idea is to be less risky than traditional startups and venture funds, but more profitable than the regular companies. So studios, especially those studios that I'm preferred to invest in, are working in a recurring business model. So from inception to early exit, or to exit, sometimes not early, but exit. So they do all the job from the very beginning, from the creating an ideas and even from the market discovery, and up to growing and exiting. My good friend Matthew Burris usually telling that studios act as, first of all, entrepreneur, second as operator, and third as investor, all together. And if you ask yourself, do you know any other model who works in the same way? maybe you will not find an answer. Maybe only those entrepreneurs who has their own capital and do not need to raise, so they can act in this way. Elon Musk sometimes acts in this way when he creates new companies. He invests a lot of money in SpaceX, his own money. He acts as entrepreneur. He acts partly as operator, means as a engineer or a CEO of company, and he acts as an investor in the same phase. So the studios are doing this on a professional base in a repeatable model, with repeatable processes, and that is why they can create something better than usual founders. Ask yourself how many companies can solo founder create through his life? Best 10. Okay, maybe 12, 15. But each studio can create those numbers of startups annually. And after you created, I don't know, 10 companies, you can be, you will know about the creation and building companies much more than anybody in your industry. That is a core asset of the studio. So repeatable process, once again and once again and once again, and in parallel, not one by one, but in parallel. That is why, if you will look to some statistics that we have now, we don't have too much statistics yet. In the future, of course, we will have much more, but not too much now. But even those statistics that we have shows us that, for example, in terms of the time, studios can build startups twice quicker than a partnership between traditional founders and the fund. You can see some numbers on this graph. For example, I don't know, 2.75 years, so less than 3 years to Series A. It's extremely quick. Compare once again to the traditional approach. Studios, as for now, of course, has a lot of famous startups created inside. The most famous, I think, is of course Moderna, created by Flagship Pioneering in Boston, a company that created one of the first anti-COVID how we called it?
Vaccines?
Vaccine, yeah. Vaccines. Yeah, not treatment, unfortunately, but vaccines, yes. There are others, of course, examples you can see here on this slide. So there are famous names. But from my point of view, studios usually creating not famous startups because they are not focusing on a very large valuation in opposite to venture funds. They can sometimes create very famous startups, but usually they are doing, let's say, hundreds unknown startups, but they play crucial roles in their sectors of economy. If you will look to the right, you will see that this is a compare between two investments in one startup called HIMS, and Atomic, it's a venture studio in US who created and invested in this startup, and a fund for a runner also invested in this startup. And you can see at the end of this table, that the difference between the results of this investment is so huge. It's so huge. And it's understandable. Studios working under the conditions of traditional founder conditions. So they are getting the most valuable shares at the beginning, equity at the beginning. And that is why they can make much more multiply and much more IRR for their investors compared to funds, even compared to early stage funds, and especially compared to later stage funds that cannot have such kind of IRR and multipliers. There is also one of the main, I think, motivation for founders of studios to create studios. They want to reach such kind of multipliers. As I told, yes, venture studio are doing large exits, but what is most important from my point of view, it's not the size of exit, but it's a number of exits. And I think the best practices are showing to us, and definitely will show in the future, that studios can go for a 50% exit rate. It's something unbelievable now. But if you will thinking about how studios are acting, these repeatable processes, and if you will take into account that studios do not looking only for a high valuation exits, but they are okay with a medium exits, you can understand how they will go to this kind of 50% exit rate. What is also important, I want to mention that studios usually have extremely low loss rate. If you ask myself, my experience in TechnoSpark, from 120 startups, half of them, a bit less, survived through the 10 years. And if you will ask me what part of the capital, investment capital, we lost for those startups that we closed, I will tell you around 5%. Why? Because we were killing startups at the beginning, as soon as possible. So most of the startups that we agree to grow, that went from the initial stage to the second stage and third stage and follow on, were startups that already survived. So that is why loss rate is so low. And one of the last points that I wanted to show you is an example. It's an example of very well-known studio called Hexa in France, in Paris, with headquarters in Paris. Former, the name of this venture studio was eFounders. So you can see here on this graph the growth of this venture studio. So the top line, blue line, is a total valuation of all the startups that Hexa created. From 2011 to 2022, through 12 years, they created 35 startups. By the way, through the last few years, they created additionally 15. So they are growing in the numbers of startups also, not only in evaluations. But in this period, up to 2022, they created 35 startups. The total valuation of those 35 startups was around 5 billion. And they started with nothing. In 2011, it was 5. So it means that through this period, we have 1,000 times growth of portfolio, of valuation of portfolio of startups that particular studio created. You can say it's a best example. Yes, it's a very good example. But I can say that many studios can grow for this track, can go for this track, because especially in the future, we will see more and more examples. I know now minimum 5 studios only in my small scope that I'm looking to invest in that projected for such type of growth. So ending, make some conclusions. So first of all, studios are venture studios or startup studios, or we can say just studios, are definitely the new asset class, especially from the point of view of investors. And definitely this kind of venture class will grow in terms of value, in terms of numbers. And it's quite hot topic all over the world. More than 1,000 studios we have all over the world. Will this model go through some challenges? Yes, definitely. And every year we have a lot of discussions about the future of this model, of this business model, and about the potential and about the disadvantages for investors and so on. But the same as it were 5 or 50 or 70 years ago with venture funds, when they just emerged, when there were no standards, no frameworks. The same we have now with the studios. This is why, together with my partners, we created Venture Studio Forum. It's a new association that created just last month, and now it's opened the doors for members. And this association, non-for-profit association of venture studios and investors, is willing to bring standards, is willing to bring common frameworks for this asset class, for investors who are eager to invest in this type of the asset class, and for founders who are willing to start new studios or develop their existing studios. So if some of you are planning to open the new studio, or you are looking to invest in these studios, this is a good opportunity to learn a lot of, much more than anybody, including me, can say in a 20 or 30-minute talk. But inside this association, you will get access to this, to the professional analysis and reports, and the professional people who are supporting, and I can say advocating, this venture studios as asset class. So that is a final slide that I wanted to show you, and it's very good that we have more than 30 minutes for a talk. I'm open for your questions, and please ask me.
Thank you very much, Denis. So now we're gonna open it for questions. Anyone who has a question, please feel free to raise your hand or share in the chat, and I'll ask the question. Now, I am the host, so I'm gonna ask the first question for you, Denis, which is, what are the common mistakes that you see many venture studios make? What are, or as an investor, what are the red flags when you're planning to invest in a venture studio? What are some red flags that you see? What are the mistakes and the red flags that you see in venture studios?
First of all, I want to say that I don't know any venture studio that is not making mistakes. First of all, because once again, it's extremely new type of business. And when you are participating in new type of business, you will make mistakes. And a lot of mistakes. And if you are not ready to make mistakes and to learn from this mistake, don't go to venture studio for a venture studio. Do something much more well-known. Do accelerator or venture fund. You will make less mistakes than inside the venture studio. I made a lot, and I lost a lot of money through those mistakes. The second part of my answer will be the following. I think that a lot of organizations call themselves venture studios but they are not. When we are talking about service providers, companies who are working in a model like a startup as a service, or that bring some services to startups, I do not think it doesn't matter, even for equity, even for an exchange of equity, I do not think we can call them venture studios, because what is important that venture studios are starting from the beginning, from the ideation, from the market research. I even can say that studios are explorers. They are researchers. If studio does not making research, it's not a studio. Research in the industry, studio is working. I will give you one example. One of the best studio in Europe, also in France, but working widely in Europe and a bit in US, OSS Ventures, they're focusing in one vertical. This vertical called manufacturing operations. And they create SaaS startups and AI, of course, for particular these vertical. How do they decide what kind of startups to create? How do they make ideation? Every day, every single day, they make research on a particular different manufacturing in Europe and in US. Every day, team of OSS, part of the team of OSS, you can find somewhere in the fabs. And they are assessing fabs. They are looking how this particular fab is working, how this particular fab is using software for a different aspect of operations, and so on and so on. So they made more than, they explore more than 900 fabs sites in 4 years. So every single working day they are somewhere. And that is why they can create the knowledge on top of which they can create ideas for startups, proper ideas, not something that you will imagine during your night. It's not ideas from the retreat with mushrooms. No. It's ideas that came from the hard and deep research, but not traditional research in the lab, but market research in the field. So I think this is the main mistake that a lot of studios are doing. They want to start with the ideas that founders of the studios already have. It's okay. If you have, I don't know, 10 ideas at the beginning, it's good to start with. But the question is how you will systematically create new ideas, new 100 ideas. And it means that you need to have, I don't know, thousands of hypotheses.
Dennis, we have a question by Drea related to the research point. Drea, do you want to ask it? Do you want me to?
Sure, happy to ask it, especially because I think you answered the first part of my question. So if these studios are creating the ideas because they have a deep understanding of a specific space, how do they attract founders that will actually push through to launch, that will, fall in love with that idea and drive it, even though it's not theirs?
I thank you for this question, Andrea. First of all, I will answer radically. Some of the studios do not attract founders. I know some very good studios that do not attract founders at all. So they build companies from scratch to exit by themselves. it means that the founders of the studios are entrepreneurs who can build in parallel a few companies and annually started additional new companies. I don't know, 3-5 companies. So, but it's a radical answer. I mean, I know such type of studios, but most of the studios, of course, attracting co-founders. That is why if you look on this slide, you will see that the equity of studio is like from 25 to 100.
Right.
So 100 means you don't attract. 25 or 30 means that you need co-founder, and you will give to this co-founder, I don't know, 25 or 50 percent of equity. And yes, for those studios, and we usually called it venture type of the studios, then because there are different types of the studios. This type we can call venture type. So they are looking for a founders. First of all, if you will ask yourself how many founders or potential founders have a proper ideas for the startups, and you will ask it without any illusions, we will say that only a few, mostly those who are repeatable founders. Usually the first idea of any founders is something that will go to trash. If founders are working with studios, they are getting ideas that are much higher quality, because once again they came from the special market and customer research. If I would like to make a new startup and I have skills but I do not have idea, I can agree with the idea of studio. I can come to studio and to look to different ideas and to take one, to ask to take one that is most suitable for me. And by the way, the studio will make the same process. They will make a matching. They will make like an assessment of not only idea, but also founder. In my studio, we had a special tool to assess founders, to assess entrepreneurial skills for founders. By the way, in a form of business game, but it's another story. A lot of companies now assess their top managers and just managers with through the gaming, yes, because in a game people are opening their real skills. It's not like a testing or like an interview where you can make a lot of illusions. So
yeah, I would love, by the way,
they are making this matching between founder and idea. In the same today I will use this example. In the same example of OSS Studio, I think they have more than 100 candidates every month who apply for a position of co-founder for any of startups that OSS plan to create. If they are creating, I don't know, 5 startups per year or 10 startups per year, 1 per month, you need only 1. And if you have a funnel for of the, I don't know, 30, 50 per month, and in general have a funnel of thousands of startups or founders, sorry, you can choose. Of course, more mature studios have privilege because they are well known. They have some brand and a reputation and already done startups, first of all. For new studios, it's more difficult. And that is why usually the best studios are starting by entrepreneurs. And the first few years, there is a founders of studios of particular studio who are acting as founders and entrepreneurs. I was a CEO in, I don't know, 12 companies at the beginning. I don't remember how many at the beginning. So yes, that is a question, but for a studio, it's not like a problem. It's a process for a studio to create a funnel of potential co-founders and to assess them.
Dennis, quick question here. Can you please share some examples of successful studios that are keeping 100%?
100% of equity?
Yeah.
No. No, I will not tell you those names. No.
Okay.
No. But believe me, there are.
Okay. Thank you. We'll find them. If there
Yeah,
are out there, we will find them.
Definitely. And by the way, I think you will see more and more studios of those types that are acting as full entrepreneur and with their own investments. Because for those studios, the crucial question is how they will act without external investments. And if they can survive. And I think this integration of the entrepreneurial and investment position is one of the very important track for a future. And we will see more and more studios who integrate these two roles in one and acting without any or mostly without venture funds and without so-called speculating investors and so
on. Okay, thank you. So let's go to next questions. Gus, I've seen your hand, but I have two other questions before you. And yeah, I've seen your question, so you're the third one. First is Alexa. Alexa, please feel free to ask. Then is Daniel's question in the chat, and then is Gus. Alexa.
Thank you. All right, so I was wondering about basically operational approach of the studio, meaning like what was the kind of structure of organization? Were the people incentivized to self-organize? Was there some kind of hierarchy? What were the processes like of knowledge sharing and those kind of things related to TechnoSpark, if possible?
If you're asking just related to TechnoSpark, yes, I can answer you quite easy. Our structure was, let's say, quiet, built in a quiet horizontal way, not a vertical way. The core of the team were venture builders. So people who build startups and they were a part of startup studio. More than a part of particular startups. They were a group of supporters, financial, legal, IT, security, some other things. And there were a lot of subcontractors. So a lot of outsource. It was a part of our, by the way, ideology to not only for a startup studio, but also for startups to push startups for as more outsource as it can. So we prefer that from the investment budget of each startup, more than 50% should go to outsource. Because in this case, startup will fully focus on the core and will not switch to the second priorities. But when I'm talking about TechnoSpark, I'm talking only about hardware startups, by the way, because we did not make any SaaS startup, for example. We created only hardware startups. I don't know, semiconductors, photovoltaics, lasers, composite materials, artificial diamonds, mechatronics, robotics, and so on and so on and so on, up to genomics, but hardware. So for hardware startups, it's especially important because there are a lot of components of each product in a robot, I don't know, a few hundreds of core components. And you need to focus only on those that are the uniqueness of the startup or that are competitive advantage of this particular startup, and everything you put outsource. And the same we did for a studio. So I can say that I think that it's also quite an advantage of the studio approach when most of the people in studio are entrepreneurs by their attitude and, let's say, by their type of thinking, way of thinking. You cannot build verticals. You can work only in a horizontal way. And CEO of the studio, yes, he's in charge. Usually CEO of studio is a main shareholder in the same time. So yes, he has a strategic vision. He has some rights to change the directions, but mostly he has an obligation, or she has an obligation, to build repeating processes. So for any CEO of the studio, the operational or the function of operator is not less important than, for example, entrepreneurial function.
Thank you, Denis.
Thank you.
Next question is by Daniel Espina from Arendao. A common critique of venture studios is that taking too much equity deters top talent from joining. But I see in the practice the model works. Why is talent attracted, or is that the model relies less on top talent? Sorry, I killed the question.
Yeah, it's a good question. I think it's a continuation of the Andrea question, and yes, I will love to talk about a bit more about this. I think inside the question it was a good formula. Yes, studios, I can say, democratize entrepreneurship. So they open access to the position of the venture builder, or let's say entrepreneur, for much more scale of people than, for example, traditional venture industry. Who are venture funds are looking for? Who are they looking for? For heroes. People with a special eyes, I don't know, somebody who always in a very courage position, and so on and so on and so on. And studios are not. Of course, studios can work with such type of traditional, let's say, founders, but studios can work with much more normal people, I can say. Much more normal people. And if studios are doing 1,000 startups per year, I mean, not one studio, but a network of studios, they need this scale of people who has skills, entrepreneurial venture building skills, but who will not be successful entrepreneurs if they will act alone. By the way, that was a main topic of my book that I published last year, Thinking Like a Venture Builder, exactly about this. about the difference between the hero entrepreneurial type of the entrepreneurship and let's say normal or venture studio type of entrepreneurship. Yes, the answer is yes. Studios can work with much more normal, I do not say less talented, I can say more focused people.
Can you please expand on this, the difference between the hero and the normal entrepreneur, please?
Okay, very simple. If you are traditional entrepreneur, founder, that thinking that he's building new, I don't know, Uber or whatever, what do you need to have in your skills or capabilities? You have to have everything. You have to be a good ideation person. So you have to make extremely good market research. You have to be very good in translation of this market idea into the product requirements. So you have to be architecture of the product. You have to be a team leader. You have to be a very investment relation person. So you have to attract investors. You should be nice. People should love you. And so on and so on and so on. I can continue. You need, I don't know, have a dozen of criteria in order to be successful in this way of industry, in this way of action. If you are coming to studio, you are immediately incorporating in a partnership with a lot of different positions with whom you are splitting your entrepreneurial journey, and you can be responsible only for part of this. For example, on a venture building itself, but not for investment attracting. How many founders failed on attracting of investors? 99%? Okay, good point. In studios, founders do not attract investments at the beginning in order to make first steps. They don't spend time for this. I strongly believe that if a person can allow him or herself to be focused on something for a long period, usually people say 10,000 hours, you will be extremely good in this. If you are focused yourself on a venture building and not on investment relationships and not on ideation and not on scale operations, and by the way, not on exiting, but on venture building, how to build startup from zero to the first revenue on this period. And you repeat it through the years with the different examples of startups. In a few years, you will be the best in your class. You will be one of the best of the, I don't know, 100 people in the world or 1,000 people in the world in this particular type of action. And studio is doing exactly this. Studio, the model of studio is splitting the job of entrepreneur to different roles, to different functions, and integrate itself in a studio, but allow each person to take only one or a few functions, not all of them. That is as simple as this.
Amazing. Thank you. So last question, I guess, is from
Please.
Gustavo. Let me read it. So it says, Dennis, you mentioned founders should, of course, offer equity to attract co-founders. I've heard a fixed, example, 25% amount of equity, though. I may kill that, but this is what it says. What are your thoughts on performance-based distribution of dynamic equity?
Yeah, it's one of the possible way, definitely. And me personally use this form. I use vesting. I tried a few times to switch to transfer equity from the beginning to co-founders, and usually, in my particular experience, it was not the best cases. When I switched to not an options but vesting, so when you get parts of the equity through the milestones or through the years together with a studio and startup, it became more, let's say, more effective. Yeah, so I think yes, it could be so, especially in a studios that are not working in directly with in a venture ecosystem, in a venture fund ecosystems, but that create startups mostly by the studios. Because when you are working when some of the studios are trying to create unicorns or extremely high valuation startups, yes, they are. And if you can only do this together with venture funds, with large venture funds, and the large venture funds will not invest in startup if founders at the beginning will not have, I don't know, 30 to 50% of equity. They will not, and they will ask studio to make the studio's part of equity lower than founders. They will do this. I mean, venture funds will do this. And if you depend on the policy coming from venture funds, you have no choice. You have to go after this, after those rules. But if you are more independent, you could do different things. And I am sure that performance-based transferring of equity to co-founders is definitely one of the good options, especially for studios that are working for a growth or revenue-based model.
Awesome, Dennis. Thank you. So everyone, we have 5 more minutes.
Yeah, we can answer more questions, definitely. If they are.
Andrea, unmuted.
Yeah, you mentioned the games, the business games, and I'm fascinated. Do you have like links to those or some other information?
Yeah. In 2016, 4 years after we launched TechnoSpark, we created already something around 60 or 70 startups. And our personal networks of each of me and my partners to this time was absolutely empty, because everybody who can do anything were already together with us, or they were not proper for these positions. And we understood that we need to attract people from the networks that we do not know. Let's say from open market, let's say so. But how? Through interview. How you will assess person entrepreneurial skills from interview? You cannot. They will definitely not go for an interview. So we decided that we will try to create a game. It was, and it is, one full day game, offline game, that will simulate, it's a simulator, simulate the foundation and the growth of the new venture industry. People are doing some simple R&D with their hands, creating startups in the game, and so on and so on and so on and so on, up to exits, attracting investments and blah, blah, blah. Up to 100 people can play one game together in one venue. Sometimes 150 even. There is a special AI on top of this game, of course, that make not, so there is digital twins of each action, and that is AI that assessing these actions. So at the end of the game, after 8 or 10 hours, to be true, we know more or less everything about the skills of each person, in particular this moment. Maybe tomorrow it will be different. People will get some additional skills, but as for now, we see more or less everything what we want to see. And yes, it's still a product. In the past, from 2016, 17 up to now, around 30,000 people went through this game. In general, I think I took to TechnoSpark startups, I found more than 60 people through this game. It's mean we assessed only for those positions few thousands. So it's like a game is a way of assessing a lot of people simultaneously, and very cheap, by the way.
Yeah. And
it's much less, and it's much less expensive than traditional assessment. As you know, it's a good assessment is very expensive and requires professionals. And here you could use these game effects and AI analytic of the digital twins of each players in the game. I hope that soon. Sorry?
Did you release it as a product?
Yep. Yeah, we are selling. I have a special startup that is selling this as a product. And we have also started developing a new fully virtual game with the same task, with avatars of the previous players.
Nice. I like that.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Good.
Awesome. Thank you very much, Denis, and thanks everyone for joining this call.
And thank you for perfect questions, by the way.